Okay, the question is, how can I be taken seriously? And this, thank you for writing. This is a good question because serious times call for serious men who need to do some serious leading. That's what I'm calling men to do on this channel. And it's pretty impossible if people will not take us seriously, isn't it? So let me just ask you this. How do people see you right now? Or how did they before you decided to get serious? Were you the class clown? Were you the life of the party? Were you the gamer? Were you the cynic? How did they see you? Were you the joker? It sounds like what you want right now is a much more grown-up identity for the new dangerous world that we live in. Am I right? So this is the question to be asking. How can I be taken seriously? So the next thing we should do is think for a minute about men that you may have seen or met who observed, who had exactly what you want. What set them apart? What did you notice about them? Can you remember what they were like? Men from books, men from your past, people that you may have known. Now, I'm assuming that you've seen 2 or 3 of these men. And what you know about it and what I know about them, if they really were in this category of man, it wasn't some outward cultivated personality, was it? It was something that was part of them, deep in part of them. They weren't posing. They weren't charlatans. They weren't people who took some course in impressiveness or awesomeness, who could fake it for a few minutes. I know you're not asking me to give you some tricks about how to command a podium or how to hold a room in a meeting. And people simply know the difference between men of substance and men who are just really shallow. And empty suits is a good name for a man who, he's got a good outward appearance, but there's nothing inside. So who were men that you've seen who had, and what was it that they had? A quiet, solid confidence and a solid influence, wasn't it? What was it he had that you can remember where you might have seen people taking him seriously? It was probably a commanding presence, a confidence, a really calm confidence that people could see that he could anticipate anything that might even be happening and know what to do about it. He was very vigilant, right? Seeing challenges before they happen and addressing challenges, engaging with challenges as soon as they did happen. Now, some people call this, and this is a good phrase, executive presence. And some people call it officer's bearing. Some people call it quiet professionalism. But you can sense it when it is there, right? And even in a time when it's not a crisis, you just know that these men have it. But it really becomes evident if there is a serious situation or a crisis, like a traffic smash up. 5 or 6 cars get involved in a traffic accident, and some guy may just emerge who seems to know, he's just totally calm, knows what to do, and he can bring order to the situation just by saying, hey, you call 911. You take off your jacket and put it over that woman. You apply pressure to this wound right here. You hold this woman's head up at just this right angle to help. And just in moments they can bring confidence and control and order to the situation, right? So what is it that these guys have and that they've developed? I've met a number of men, I've watched them, I've made a study of it. In literature, men like George Washington, who wanted to retire so many times and get out of public life. And his countrymen just said, well, we really need you because you know what to do. We take you. Now, I'm paraphrasing, but essentially time and time again, they were coming to him saying, we take you seriously because you do know what to do. You do have a level of wisdom. You know what our nation should do. You know what our Congress should do. You know what our military should do. Will you please continue to try to help us? We're a needy country. We need leaders. We need men who can continue to lead, and you've proven yourself, so please keep doing it. So I've seen some men who've gained a little bit of this kind of sobriety, but only after years and years and years of learning wisdom and doing the right thing with their families and their communities. Now, I've also seen a few young men who had it. And it wasn't after years and years of experience. The youngest man I ever met who had this was 18 years old, and I met him in college. He stood out, and I watched his life for 20 years. And I noticed, too, that seasoned businessmen would see him, and they wanted him. You know, they weren't looking for a resume or credentials. They weren't waiting for him to finish college. They wanted him because they wanted to get his leadership and his confidence into their company because they could see it. And they knew how valuable it was. They knew what he was like. They knew what he was made of. And yes, they would compete for him. They would hire him. They would promote him immediately and give him huge amounts of responsibility at a young age. And so, how did he get this? How did he get this steady influence that they wanted in their companies? How did he get such maturity at such a young age? Well, I know the story. His father was a drunken brute. His father would drink and then abuse his wife. And so the young son, seeing this happen to his mother, had to learn to protect his mother by being ever vigilant and competent and interceding against this brutality. And so he learned firmness, he learned diplomacy, he learned resourcefulness. He needed to learn volumes about evil and how to confront it. And he learned to recognize it. He learned to see what it looked like. One night, the violence got so bad that the son's mom was truly in danger of losing her life from the beating. And so the son, my friend, calmly retrieved the loaded shotgun. He pointed it straight at his father's heart, and he told him the truth. And the son was taken seriously because he was deadly serious. And in paraphrasing, he just said something like this: Dad, you need to back off. You need to leave the house right now in one piece, or I will pull the trigger and you won't be in one piece. I'll have to take you out of here in many ugly and bloody pieces. And the dad left and never bothered the mother again. And so this confidence the young man obtained was earned the hard way, right? In real life, he learned to face and conquer real challenges in the real world. And that confidence showed itself in every situation that he was in. He just had this level of alertness. I really like to see that. You can see that in military veterans, because out on the field in combat, they learn that. They're always wide awake. Their lives depend on it. Well, this young man was like he was in a combat experience from a very young age. He had alertness, he had this experience, he had this knowledge, he had battle-hardened wisdom that became a total part of his life, his soul, and his backbone. And so you've just heard me say this. He had the experience. This is the root core of the answer to your question. You've got to get experience doing mature things in mature ways. You can start that right now in your own local community, solving real-life problems for real people. And your community has got plenty of them. And before long, you will be naturally poised and assured in the value of what you can contribute to any conversation or any crisis, because you will have been there and done that, seen that, solved problems. You will have the confidence like these men do, who are taken seriously, and people will see it and know it, and they'll know that you've achieved this. Now, so the answer to your question, in short, is just get out there and get experience. You'll be wiser next week than you were this week from the things that you've done. You'll be wiser then next month than you were this month. And so that truly is the most simple answer that I can give you. Get out there and get that experience and be a leader, and you'll be a better leader next year than you are this year. Now, before I close, I want you to know about a word. I'm going to give you a word that was used a lot in our country back in the 1800s. I looked at one of those charts that Google makes about frequency of word use. It was used a lot and then just gradually came down to almost nothing to today. Now that word is gravitas, Gravitas, gravitas. It means weight, dignity, importance. It connotes restraint and moral rigor. Moral rigor. If you've got moral rigor, you don't just keep making up a different moral standard every week. You're consistent and you stick to it even if it hurts. The word also conveys a sense of responsibility and commitment to the task. You're totally committed. Are you going to be committed to serving in your community. And if you are, people will see, wow, this man has gravitas and commitment. We trust him. We're going to take him seriously. The word, it also involves remaining calm, even under fire, and finding within yourself the assurance that your value in any situation is really constant and very worthwhile. So, without ever having to prove it, people will see this. And that's one thing about men with gravitas and weight and strength and dignity. They don't have to prove anything because they are men of substance. They can do things. They don't have to prove it to themselves. They don't have to prove it to anyone else. And people just see it and they know it. Now, I want to quote just real quickly an article that someone sent me about gravitas. The authors are Michael Foster and Benon Tennant, and they're trying to describe it to a generation primarily of young men who really are not familiar with it. And they're using here an analogy that's useful. It really is useful. And the analogy, they say, is gravity. Gravity pulls things into their proper place. It brings and maintains order. If it were to cease, we would all start floating helplessly. Our solar system would be reduced to chaotic chunks of rock spinning wildly into the void. So it is with gravitas, when people have it. Same thing. It establishes order and regularity. Without it, our cosmos falls into disorder and chaos. And that's true. That's exactly right. They quote John Calvin, who said that gravitas is procured by well-regulated morals. See, there's that rigor in morality. You have a high moral standard, which, John Calvin obtained from Scripture, that moral standard which he articulated in all of his writings, which he started as a very young man, trying to set this out, a systematic theology of understanding what makes the world work, what makes people work. To have the ability to discern between good and evil, between wisdom and foolishness, is to have the foundation of gravitas. How are you at that discretion and discernment? Can you tell the difference between wisdom and foolishness? Can you tell the difference between what's almost right and right? What's almost right and right. That comes from a quote by Martin Luther. He said that's really what good discernment is. The grave man is a man who has learned wisdom and trained himself in rightly ordering both himself and his world. This is why Jordan Peterson says what? Toughen up, you weasel. Clean up your room. Put your room in order. I mean, you start there, you put yourself in order, and then you put your world in order, where you have total control. Yeah, your room, put it in order. And then you will be gaining the disciplines to do more. You'll be faithful with a little, you'll be more faithful with much. His very presence, the article says, exerts force that puts in order those around him. And that's what's true. The guy who shows up at the traffic wreck. How does he do that? Well, it's because he's been in so many other situations. He just immediately engaged himself and engaged the world. And I'm sure he had a much less serious situation that he jumped into before that and gained confidence. And now he's jumping into an even a bigger situation, gaining confidence. He is a bulwark against chaos. Society lacking in grave men is a society abundant in social disorder. And this is true. And you see it through history. Those societies who don't have grave men, solid men, mature men, they cannot have order in their society. And one thing that's really interesting that I've seen in the Bible where God is giving instruction to cities and nations. And the paraphrase is, he's warning them, saying, if you turn your back on me, there will be punishments. And one of the most interesting punishments I see, and by the way, it is fair warning. He gives us total fair warning. And there are quite a long list of punishments, but one of the scariest ones of all is this. He removes from that society noble men, good leaders, men of gravitas, men of wisdom, men of experience. He just removes them out of that society, and then what have you got left? You got young people like those who are leading the mobs today. social justice warriors who have no concept of what real justice is. They're trying to just make up something that they think is trendy and popular and comfortable for them. It's not justice. They're missing it. And so you've got to have men who have gravitas and have this wisdom, men who can be taken seriously because they really do know what to do and how to live. So let me just read this quote and then I'll close. Calvin observes, quote, "Nothing is more shameful than for an old man to indulge in youthful wantonness and by his countenance to strengthen the impudence of the young." So he's saying this is a real perversion in your culture. If you've got an older man who should be wise and restrained and a really good teacher of the young, a man who knows exactly how to live and why and what maturity looks like and what wisdom looks like, he should be the one who people look to and take seriously. But if he's acting like a kid, if he is indulging in youthful wantonness, doing, just sex, drugs, rock and roll because all the other kids are doing it, who do you know who's done that? Well, I mean, one of the most vivid examples of that, in the last 15 years was Teddy Kennedy. I mean, a man who, outwardly looked extraordinarily imposing and respectful. He was really handsome. He had this big, thick head of gray, wavy hair, $2,000 suits, and he knew how to carry himself outwardly. But what would he do every lunchtime? He would go hang out in youthful wantonness, chasing women. What would he do on spring break? He would team up with a whole bunch of young kids who were completely ridiculous and silly, uncontrolled, wild, and go look for girls. To do what with them? To harm them, to hurt them, to mess up their lives. And by his countenance, he was strengthening the impudence of the young and what they were doing, not saying, hey guys, that's not what we do. That's not how men act. That's not what we do with women. He was participating with them in that. And it is really shameful to see that. In the culture, we've had a culture that's been full of men like that, men who rise into positions of leadership. I remember when Bill Clinton was governor of Arkansas, starting to run for president, and his staff was saying, hey, Governor, you really need to clean up yourself and your act. Look at your suits. Look at the way you act. You're acting like a frat boy. Now, not all of them were as blunt as that to him. But they realized, look, if you're running for president, you've got to at least pretend to be presidential. And so he started to pretend, and he took some courses, and he had some consultants who would grill him and train him and test him on some of these things. And he was able to do it. I was in a couple of meetings with him, well, more than that, I guess, observing him when he was in meetings trying to show himself now to be presidential, a worthy candidate for the highest office in the land. And he could do pretty well for about 15 minutes doing what he had been taught. But then he pretty much defaulted back to his frat boy persona, just totally bored with everything and everybody else and looking around at all the women, not focused on what he should have been focused with. He was a phony. And once he was elected, all the world leaders knew that he was a fake, knew he was a phony. No one took him seriously because he didn't have character and substance that he needed to have. He didn't have experience doing anything important and right and good because he'd been goofing off his whole time in public office, attorney general, as governor. He didn't act like a leader. He didn't think like a leader. He didn't stand up and lead. He was off playing pretty much every single day. Okay, so what are you going to do with your life? You want to be taken seriously. You know the answer now. Get out there and get experience. Doing the right thing in the right way and for the right people. You need to venture into a needy community, and that's your community. Just get out there into your community. Begin solving its problems. Be gaining maturity and wisdom. And people will see it, and they will begin to take you seriously. Thank you very much for writing.